So the first sense we're going to be talking about today is the tactile sense. Now the tactile sense is really important because we take in so much information during the day using our skin and the inside of our mouth. Now the tactile sense has basically two main roles. Now the first role is protection. So it helps us to protect ourselves from harm. So let's say you put your hand out and you touch a radiator, your protective sense will help you pull away as quick as possible so that you don't burn yourself. It gives us information about sharpness, pain, temperature, and pressure. Then the next role is discrimination. So a discrimination part of the tactile sense tells us a little bit more about what it is that we are actually feeling and what it feels like, whether it's smooth or rough, whether it's got a fuzzy feel. It also tells us a little bit more about where you are touched. So for instance, if somebody's touched your back, that you can localize that. So it gives us lots and lots of interesting information. Now, what we find is when children have lots of difficulties with the tactile sense, it has a huge impact on their function on a day-to-day basis. And I want to give you an example. So for instance, if you were outside in the garden last night and there were insects flying around and you had lots of insect bites on your arm, that's really itchy and all you want to do is scratch it. Or you might have gone to the shop, you bought a new jumper, it looks really nice, but actually when you try to put it on this morning, it's got a really scratchy collar, it feels a little bit like sandpaper, and you feel really uncomfortable wearing it. Or you've been outside, it was a little bit rainy, and you stepped into a puddle, and now your shoes and your socks are wet. And what I'm doing now is I'm asking you to go to a lecture theatre or a classroom, and you have to go and listen to somebody trying to teach you something for an hour. Now, if you think about those three things, the insect bites, the scratchy jumper, the wet socks, it's going to be very, very difficult to focus on this person trying to teach you something because all you're going to be thinking about is dealing with these sort of tactile issues. And that is what happens with our children on a day-to-day basis. They have to sit in class and they have to cope with quite a lot of these things. So firstly, we're going to talk about our children that's over-responsive or sensitive to touch. Now, things that we might see is that children might react negatively to certain textures of clothes. So they might ask for parents to cut labels out of clothes. They might be very specific about the texture of the clothes that they wear. They won't wear denim, for instance. They want their socks and shoes to be just right. They often get really bothered by the seams of the socks. Some parents have reported issues with underwear to the point where children would actually go without the underwear because it's so uncomfortable wearing it. But that can cause lots of problems for our children. So then we also see that children dislike their face or hands being washed. They don't like being in water, don't want to have a shower because they don't like the water on their face. It could also be that some of this affects bonding with parents or grandparents because the children avoid hugs and kisses. So as soon as somebody comes close by, they'll pull away or they'll have an adverse reaction, and that can cause lots of emotional distress. We also see that some children walk on their toes. Now, of course, there's lots of different reasons for children to walk on their toes, and it might be that they've got shortening of their tendons at the back of their leg. But it can definitely be one of the reasons, could be sensory, because being up on your toes makes sure that you make a very, very small amount of contact with the grass, the gravel, the sand, the wooden floors, whatever it is that the child finds quite tricky to cope with. Then we also see lots of emotional outbursts. We often get reported that children have behavior problems in terms of pushing and pulling other children. And it might be because they can't cope with children being close to them because they don't have control over who is touching them. So maybe standing in the line in school or sitting on the carpet or anything like that can cause lots of problems. Then one of the main things that children have difficulties with is, of course, grooming activities. So cutting nails, cutting hair, brushing teeth, washing hair, going to the dentist, any of those sort of things can cause lots of issues for our children. So let's think about how we can help our children when they have these tactile sensitivities. Now, the first and really important strategy is to always approach your child from the front. So make sure that they expect the touch. So we don't want to approach them from the back, touch them on the shoulder, because then you're going to have an adverse reaction because the child is not expecting it. So the best thing to do is often to say, would it be okay if I give you a hug? Or can mommy or granddad give you a kiss? And if the child say no, then we have to accept it, because that is not about the person, it is about the touch. Now, what's also important to remember is that we need to educate our family and our friends about this. Because often nanny and granddad or the aunties or uncles think that your specific child doesn't like them because of this adverse reaction that always happens when they want to approach them and give them a hug or a kiss. But if we could teach them that it's all about the touch and not the person, then it's so much easier to cope. And if they ask for a hug and a kiss and the child say yes, then it's all good. But if they say no, then we have to accept that. Now, the next thing we can do is think about a strategy called deep pressure touch. Now, I'm going to use that strategy quite a lot throughout my talk today because deep pressure touch has a calming effect on the nervous system. So let's think about if you go for a massage somewhere and you lie on the bed and somebody gives you a nice deep massage through your legs, your back, your arms, and you get that real relaxed feeling. And that is what we are aiming for. So by doing something like that, we can help the children to calm their nervous system. Now, firstly, let's think about a child that doesn't like any messy activity. Maybe they don't want to play with paint or glue or anything like that. What you could do is you could massage their hands, give it nice deep massage, all the fingers, before they're going to engage with this activity. And then hopefully it will make it a little bit easier. The next thing we can use is something called compression clothing. Now, compression clothing is similar to what our children wear when they do sports activities, when they play hockey or netball or rugby. It's the skins that they wear under their kit. That's nice and tight, stretchy fabric, and what it does, it gives you a nice firm hug. So for some children, that really helps if they wear that under their school uniform, because it just gives them that sense of calm all the time. You also get something called a compression vest. And that is made out of a stretchy fabric, a bit like wetsuit material. And you wrap it around your child's body, and it really gives them a nice firm hug. So for some children, that can really be helpful. The next thing you can try, and I don't know if any of you have heard of it before, is using weighted items. Now, there's a wide variety of things that's possible. So firstly, you can get a weighted lap pad that your child can put on their lap. It's got some weighted beads in it that just gives enough pressure to try and calm that nervous system. You can also get some that goes over the shoulders, and it varies in sizes. Now, something that I always say to parents is as soon as we think about any sensory toys or sensory clothes, we find that it's often really expensive. So I really encourage parents to go online, have a look around, research, to try and find things that might be a little bit alternative, and that would be cheaper. You know, it could be a YouTube clip that shows you how to make some of these things, or it could be on Etsy, or it could be on Amazon, or any of those websites that might sell some of these things a little bit cheaper. Something I personally really like to use is Wheatie bags, because a Wheatie bag is very versatile. It's quite nice and heavy. You can put it in the microwave, so it's nice and warm if that's what your child enjoys, or you can put it in the fridge and it's nice and cold, or you could put some essential oils or a nice flavor or spray on it, and then your child can smell it if that's something that they really enjoy. Another thing you can, of course, do is take a stuffed toy, maybe a favorite toy of your child, put some beans inside, and just give it a little bit of weight. Quite a lot of these Wheatie bag websites that sell them also sell these stuffed toys. So again, what's great is they can go in the microwave as well. Another really cheap, easy option is taking an old hot water bottle. You can fill it with sand. It usually has a lovely, fluffy, textured covering, and then your child can just put that on their lap when they are out about to make things a little bit easier. You also get a weighted jacket. So this is a jacket that's got pockets inside with weights in it, and then what you can do is you remove the weights until you get to the right amount. Now, something that's really important to remember is when we use anything weighted, especially our weighted jacket or a weighted blanket, is that this weight should never be more than 5 to 10% of your child's body weight. So always weigh your child first before you use any of these items, because we don't want to weigh the children down completely. Now, something else, of course, that we can try, especially if we think about the school setting, is we can make sure that our child stands at the back of the line. Because when they're at the back of the line, they're in control of the situation. They've got children in front of them, and they know that nobody will touch them. Because what often happens is when they're in the middle, they start pushing everybody around to get them away from them. So this next strategy is really important, because I think that we should start teaching our children to do their own self-care tasks as soon as possible. Because when they do these things themselves, cut their own nails, brush their own hair, brush their own teeth, then they are in control of the situation. If we do it to them, it's really uncomfortable for them. But when they do it themselves, they find it so much easier. So thinking about that, we have to keep in mind that we always apply deep pressure when we touch our children. So avoid tickling them or playing with their hair or doing anything light touch, because what happens is the light touch is often a very painful experience. And what we see, especially in the school setting, is a child might have somebody walk past them ever so lightly, brushed against their skin, and they have that adverse reaction saying, you know, who's hit me? Why did you hit me? And maybe push them away, when actually it was just that very light touch, but to them that is a very uncomfortable experience. So that's why we have to think about where we position our children in the classroom setting. So we are going to avoid having them maybe in the middle of a group of other children sitting on the carpet, because potentially they could be touched. Or when they sit in class at the desk, they shouldn't sit where there's going to be a lot of traffic, where children walk past to maybe get a pencil or a ruler. So maybe at the back of the class or the side would be one of the best positions for your child. Now, what we also want to think about is children with sleeping issues. Now, a lot of children really struggle to fall asleep or stay asleep. And one of the main issues is that parents don't know how to cope in this situation. So it often causes lots of meltdowns, lots of upsets. So we need to think about how can we make our child's room a little bit more sort of sensory friendly. And one of the strategies that really can help is using a weighted blanket. So it's similar to what I've mentioned before, but this time this blanket is quite big. It's filled with pockets of weight, and it goes over your child's bed. And what it does, it applies lots of deep pressure while they are sleeping, and that seems to calm the nervous system. I mean, I've heard of children where the parents actually physically have to lie on top of them for them to fall asleep. And then something like a weighted blanket can really help. Other things that you could, of course, try is taking a bed sheet and then just tuck your child in really tightly, because again, they get that deep pressure. Another thing is maybe sleeping in a sleeping bag. So for some children that works really well. Or they could have something that it's a stretchy fabric that maybe goes underneath the mattress, around the bed, and then it's got a zip, and then it just sort of tucks the child in. So lots of different things that you can try to help your child to stay asleep and fall asleep. But again, when we think about our weighted blanket, nothing more than 5 to 10% of your child's body weight. And when you place it on your child's body, chest weight and down, and nothing higher. Now, another strategy that we can use to support our children with tactile sensitivity is using something called the brushing program, or it's called the Wilbarger protocol. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of this before, but basically this was developed by 2 occupational therapists in America who worked with a big caseload of children that had significant tactile issues. So what they of course did was tried lots of different options where they would brush the children, or they would use different fabrics or textures just to see if they could reduce the sensitivity of the skin. So one of the things that they did try was a surgical brush. And a surgical brush basically has plastic bristles on the back end, which is quite bendy and soft. And they found that when they do that it really helped to decrease the sensitivity of the child's skin. Basically, you brush the child's arms, you brush their back, and you brush their legs, and then you do a few exercises where you compress some of the joints together. So as I said about tactile input, deep pressure touch being quite calming, also deep pressure through the joints of the body have the same effect. So they've combined the two. So with the deep pressure activities, it's just a few activities that they do with the arms and the legs. The whole process takes about 3 minutes, but that can definitely help children that's got difficulties with wearing different textures of clothes and things like that. I had a boy on my caseload many years ago, and he was in year 6, and he was allowed to wear his tracksuit bottoms to school, his big t-shirt, his shoes without his socks, because he couldn't tolerate anything else. But he was really worried because, of course, starting in September, he was going to secondary school and he had to wear his school uniform. So what we did is I demonstrated the brushing program to Mum and this boy, and they brushed him throughout the holidays. So the idea is to do it regularly throughout the day, every hour and a half if possible. And when he went to school in September, he was actually able to wear his school uniform. So it didn't take all the sensitivity away, but it definitely helped to decrease the sensitivity of the skin. So now we're going to look at our children that's under-responsive to touch. So these are the children that's got a glass that's empty. And they're going to try and fill it to get that to the halfway mark. So we find that these children often might have a messy face. They might have eaten some food, there's some jam on their cheek, or they've got a runny nose, but they've got no awareness of it. You know, we see people out and about, maybe riding their bikes with their tracksuit bottoms halfway down, and you think, surely you must feel that. But some people are under-responsive, and they have got no awareness of the fact that their clothes are maybe not properly where it should be. We also find that children go to the toilet or they get dressed in the morning, and when they come back, their clothes are completely twisted on their body, or it might be that the shirt is hanging out where the rest is tucked in, and they just don't have any awareness of that. We also see that some children have reduced pain awareness. So they might hurt themselves, you know, they fall, they knock themselves over, they bump against things, and they really hurt themselves, but they just don't react the way we would expect them. I've had lots of parents telling me about children breaking maybe an arm or a leg, and then only after a few days they go to A&E because the child keeps complaining about this arm or leg feeling a little bit uncomfortable, but not even really being aware of how much they've hurt themselves. We also see that some of these children like to chew on things, so they like to put anything in their mouth. They might bump and crash into other children. They just generally have quite a lack of an awareness of what goes on around them. So what sort of activities can we do to help our children when they are under-responsive to touch? Now, I think one of the main things that I think is really helpful is if we use social stories, or we use social practice and repetition. For instance, if your child always has a messy face, or their clothes are twisted on their body, teach them the strategy of making use of a mirror. So instead of maybe wiping their nose or cleaning their face, send them to the mirror or take them there and say, let's have a look and see what it is that we need to change. You know, do you need to wipe your nose or do you need to wipe your face? And then we can teach them that every time after they've had a meal or every time after they've been to the toilet or they got dressed, that they need to check their appearance in the mirror. And then they'll have a good indication if there's anything that needs changing. And that will sort of take them into adulthood, because make no mistake, children that's under-responsive often ends up as adults that's under-responsive. So it's a good strategy to use throughout. Another thing we can do is to make sure that there's lots of different textures, lots of different body position, lots of different activities that our children can experience. So when we think about our sensitive children, they try to avoid lots of tactile experiences. But our under-responsive children need lots and lots of different experiences. So it might be that they touch things that's soft or smooth or gritty or rough. They might work in different body positions, especially if we think about our lethargic children. Those are the children, remember, the ones that don't fill their glass. They just stay the way they are. So they need lots of movement activities to keep them going and keeping them alert. So it might be that then they sit at the desk to do some work, and then they might be standing or sitting on the carpet or lying down on their tummies. So just moving around will help the children to activate that sensory system so that they are more alert and more awake. Another thing we can try, if we think about those under-responsive children that's quite lethargic, is if we think about a pencil, when we hold it, the shaft is quite smooth and easy to hold. So if we put a little pencil grip maybe on the front of our pencil that's got spiky plastic bristles, then when our child holds this pencil grip, it will make them so much more aware of having something in their hand. So that's a good strategy in class to help our children to feel a little bit more alert.